All right, here we are. I did this before with Heidi. I
Mm.
forgot I forgot to go live. But anyways, here we are at the Comic Arts Workshop. My name is Ramon Gill. I'm the organizer. And I apologize, a little bit noisy where I am. I wasn't able to find a private space quickly enough. And I'm probably just going to mute myself after I ask the questions.
Okay.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, this stems from a conversation we were having on Facebook with Elliot and some other folks, and I thought it'd be great to make this into a live conversation. And so here we are. I would love to hear insights from you guys about the fall and rise of comics in the 90s. So without further ado, we have Tom DeFalco, a former Marvel editor, and we have Elliot S. Maggin, one of the senior writers at DC at the time. So our first question is, could you please introduce yourself, what you're doing now, and what you were doing then? And let's start with Tom, and then we'll go to Elliot.
I'm, Tom DeFalco, former editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. Before that, I worked for Archie Comics, so I'm kind of a bum. I've only had two real jobs, and I've also written a whole bunch of comic books over the years. The stuff I'm doing now has nothing to do with comics and really is not pertinent to this conversation. It's up to
Is
you.
that it?
That's it.
Okay.
There's not much.
Well, at the time, I spent 15 years writing Superman and a bunch of other stuff for DC and a few things for Marvel. Every time I had a fight with my editor, I used to call up Stan and ask me if he had any work for me, which he always seemed to. And then I would disappear because I'd make up with Julie. But it didn't seem to bother him. He just kept giving me work whenever I asked. It was very nice of him. I was an editor there for a couple of years until 1990 when I left. Came to LA, and then all the shit hit the fan. But I managed to dodge most of it. Not that I had anything to do. But for the past 17 years, I was working at a hospital teaching software. And I've written a few books. I wrote 2 bestsellers when I was in my 20s. And I've been trying to duplicate that trick ever since. So
we're always trying to duplicate that trick.
Yeah. How are you, Tom?
Overall, doing okay. Okay. How about you?
Okay. Really okay. I mean, I kind of don't have to be anywhere or do anything. So I'm working really hard trying to get a book done. Which is nice.
It is nice.
How's the fam?
Huh?
How's the fam?
The fam is good. The fam is good.
Say hi.
Okay. And your family as well, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, in your own words, can you please let us know what your experience was of what happened in 1993 when sort of the industry sort of tanked?
Well, the industry, we were building towards a bubble. And, a lot of that was Marvel's fault. We started to do these enhanced covers. And the first couple of enhanced covers we had done, we never even advertised them because, quite frankly, we didn't know if the technology would work. So we just kind of did a bunch of enhanced covers for free. And what happened was the readership, the speculators, whatever you want to call them, really liked those enhanced covers. And something else happened in the 90s, which was Ron Perlman bought the company and took Marvel public. And initially the stock, rose like crazy. And suddenly all these venture capitalists decided there was big money in comic books. And as we know, that's a lie. But all these venture capitalists believed that there was big money in comic books. So suddenly, overnight, like 10, 15, I don't know how many different companies popped up out of existence. And each of the companies introduced 10, 15 first issues. Very few of them ever saw a second issue, all with enhanced covers. And the retailers were investing very, very heavily in these things. So we knew at a certain point that the bubble was going to pop. I remember walking into a comic book store at one time, and the guy was complaining about Marvel comics he hadn't sold. So he took me into the back room, and he had a box of unsold Marvel comics. And it was a pretty healthy box. And I thought, oh, well, I'm sorry that you didn't sell them. And then I looked, and I saw that he had about 10 cases of a number one from another company. And I said, wait a minute, what about all those? And he said, oh, you don't know. That's money in the bank. And I said to him, I have a hunch your bank is closed and you don't know it yet. 3 weeks later, there was a sandwich shop in place of that comic book store. Things came to a head, I think, with the death of Superman, because the world reacted to the death of Superman. You couldn't turn on a news show, pick up a magazine that wasn't discussing the death of Superman. And, DC sold a lot of comic books based on the death of Superman. And more power to them. I mean, that was a great event. Of course, you're going to sell a lot of comics. But a couple of months later, I'm going to say, my memory is very poor here, maybe 4 months, maybe 5 months later, they had the return of Superman. And all the retailers basically ordered the return of Superman like they wished they had ordered the death of Superman. And needless to say, you can still buy those comic books in the quarter bins. That started a cascade of shops going out of business. Once the direct stores started going out of business, I remember talking to our management saying, listen, as long as we don't do something stupid, we will recover. We just can't do something stupid. So naturally, they bought their own distributor, which is probably the dumbest thing any publisher can do. And then at the time, we were publishing a lot of titles, and they decided, hey, we're going to cut our titles in half because the remaining titles will sell twice as well, and our profits will go up. And I tried to explain to them how that was also stupid, especially if you're buying your own distributor. And that was that meeting was the meeting in which management decided it was time for us to part ways. That worked out well for me because I wasn't there for the big bloodbath that followed.
Jeez. Well, I was out of town by then. I had come to LA in 1990, and I bounced around a few of those fly-by-night comic companies. I was editor-in-chief at a few of them for like 10 minutes. And my perspective on it was that, I had an enormous amount of backlog, amount of creative work out in the wind. So I figured I was okay forever. And it's just not true. It wasn't at the time, and it isn't now. And depending on, the retailers buying all that stuff, it reminds me of people with a pretty decent 401k about 6 months ago. And they keep telling me, don't look at it. Don't look at it. So
and they're right. Don't look at it. You can only lose money if you sell your stocks. The stock market will recover. Just don't look at it.
I think that's probably true, but I got to buy a car.
See, again, my advice is don't do something stupid.
Yeah.
I was just notified my IRA. I've come to that age where I have to start taking money out of it.
Me too. They tell me I have to.
Yeah, we have no choice.
We're like ancient, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
A friend of mine asked me the other day, is there anybody around in the industry who predates you still? And I had to think, I can't think of anybody. I mean, I know there are people, but
there's a handful of people.
Yeah, when George died a few days ago.
Yeah, John Romita's still around.
John, yeah.
Sal Buscema.
He's great, isn't he great?
He is incredible. I mean, both of these guys, they are both so sweet. And such gentlemen. And, I speak to Sal on a semi-regular basis. He's kind of a member of the family at this stage of the game. And, he thinks he's retiring, but we're not going to let him. And I can't, okay. I was trying to get my head.
Yeah, I know. It's just had to freeze.
But even at Sal's age, he's still struggling to get better.
Oh yeah. When does that stop? I mean,
And I know how he feels because I keep thinking, give me 2 or 3 more years and I'll actually get this comic book thing right.
You want to hear a good John Romita story?
Sure.
This is like 20, 25 years ago, it must be. A friend of mine calls me up, says, I got a nephew who's this big Spider-Man fan. Can you get original Spider-Man artwork? And I said, no, nobody can get original Spider-Man artwork. She said, well, just, make a call. So I called up John. Hadn't talked to him in maybe 10 or 15 years. And he says, oh, hi, Elliot. How you doing? I said, yeah, hi, John. And we got around to my real question. He says, no, you know what I do? As soon as I get the originals back, I sell them. They're out the door. They're gone. I only have this one splash page that, might be of some interest. I said, what's that? He said, well, it's this shot of Mary Jane on the beach and Spider-Man in the distance kind of swinging toward her. And I said, bikini? He says, yeah. I said, I'll buy it. So he says, okay, how about send me $175? I said, okay. I mean, I have no idea what it would be worth, but I gave him $175.
Great deal.
And,
A great deal. Great deal.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought even at the time. So he sends it to me and I give it to my friend for $175. I should have tacked a little on, but she was a friend. Yeah. So she gives it to her nephew and he puts it on his wall and it's still on his wall. And now he's a big movie star. It's still on his wall. And he has no idea where this thing came from. He keeps showing up at comic conventions and I never run into him. But I saw him interviewed on some talk show and he says, well, I'm a big movie star now, so I can have lunch with anyone I want. He says, so I called up Stan Lee one day and he's having lunch with Stan Lee and he's describing it as cheating on his grandfather. Some kid. And I threw my shoe at the damn television. I said, you're cheating on me, you son of a bitch. I'm going to tell him someday.
And guys, I want to ask you guys. So when getting back to what happened back then in the 90s.
What we're really talking about.
Yeah. That's okay. I know you guys haven't seen each other in a long time, probably. But I want to ask you guys, how did it affect you and your colleagues as far as career-wise? What happened? Or some of the ramifications of that? I guess, I don't know. Do you call it a crash, a bubble burst, whatever?
Everybody I talked to was out of work. Yeah, that's all there is to it. And nobody quite knew why at the time. Only Tom knew. Well, he couldn't do anything about it either.
When Marvel bought its own distributor, the following month, the sales of every comic book went down like, I think it was like 60%. Up until then, people were making big money on their royalties. I remember at one point, when I was sensing that the bubble was getting ready to pop, I spoke to a couple of freelancers and they said, listen, make sure you're putting some money aside. Invest, put some money aside. And the guys looked at me and said, "Why? What is Marvel planning to do to us? Are they going to cut the rates? Are they going to do this?" Marvel's not planning on anything, but this is a bubble. It's going to pop. And they thought we had some nefarious thing up our sleeve.
Why do you think? Why do you think circulation dropped when Marvel took over distribution?
Because a lot of retailers were offended by this. Up until then, they were living off of Diamond. Diamond was extending a lot of credit to the guys. And when Marvel came in, they wanted to be paid for their comic books. They were not extending as much credit. And consequently, guys cut their orders. And a lot of guys, when Marvel announced that it was going to have its own distributor, and like within a month, I think DC announced that they were going to sign exclusive with Diamond. I again remember walking into a comic book store, and he had a sign, "I will no longer sell Marvel or DC comic books." And I thought, "You're out of business."
Pretty much.
Retailers are a cowardly and superstitious lot, and they go out of the way to hurt themselves.
Tom, it sounds like when you warned that those creators, it sounded like you kind of saw the writing on the wall. You knew something was coming. Elliot,
Yeah, I mean, that there's boom and bust, and we were in the boom times. Everybody had to know that at a certain point there'd be a bust time. And all I was saying to guys is, don't spend it all. Just put some money aside for the rainy days, because we all know that there will be rainy days. You write a book and you get tremendous royalties. No guarantee that your next book is going to give you tremendous royalties.
Now,
That's my story.
So all of our stories.
Yeah. There just wasn't the kind of money in it at the time where you could put any away. I mean, it was really a struggle. I mean, I've got this massive education. I should have made a lot more money than I've made. But if you can write fiction for a living, geez, that's all you want to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love writing fiction.
Yeah. I got a degree in journalism. I don't want to write journalism. I want to make shit up.
Yeah, it's a lot easier.
It's much more fun.
Absolutely.
Well, I just graduated with my master's in illustration, so I want to draw fiction. Now, let me ask you this, because you called it a boom, right? Was that boom like a particularly unusual period of prosperity for comics? I mean, that was a time when Image was making money hand over fist. That's when there's a lot of speculators. Do you think that particular boom was an anomaly for the industry?
That kind of boom, I think, yes, because here's an interesting thing. When the Image guys, left Marvel, do you think sales at Marvel went up or down? They went up.
Would have gone up.
Yeah. I mean, Jim Lee leaves the X-Men, and suddenly the X-Men is selling 20% better. Why? Because of all the publicity about Jim Lee leaving the X-Men. Rob Liefeld leaving, X Factor, not X Factor, Cable, whatever book he was working on. Just the brain is not working anymore, as if it ever did. But when the guys left, Todd McFarlane left Spider-Man, sales on Spider-Man went up again. It was a very interesting time, and guys were making, comic books has always been an industry of pennies, where a lot of us for many years were just living off our page rates. But around this time, when they had they called them incentives, royalties, whatever you want to call them, guys were making some pretty decent money. I got some checks that I couldn't believe, and I wasn't working on anything special.
Elliot, any thoughts on that question?
geez, nothing to add. I don't know.
Mm.
Let's do a variation on a theme. What were some of the questions that came up on that Facebook conversation I was having?
Um, I think there was also some debate on whether or not the distribution, the fact that we switched to direct market, the industry switched to direct market, that there was some speculation that um, that the industry lost its ability to recruit new readers. You know, before you could go to a corner store and buy comic books, and
Yeah,
when the industry switched to direct market, I mean, what 8-year-old kid is able to travel 5 miles to the nearest comic book shop?
right, right.
Yeah.
What do you guys
Well,
think of that?
Well,
I,
the
I
audience became different. I mean, the audience, the potential comics audience of the 50s in the 90s was doing video games and movies and interactive stuff online.
I remember at Marvel one time, uh, Paul Levitz announced that they were going to, give up the newsstand and concentrate on the direct market. And I remember, looking at the
This was
article.
like 80, right?
Yeah, I think I was in the Comics Buyer's Guide or something like that. And I'm looking at this article, and Mark Grunwald walks in, and I said, "Well, we never have to worry about DC again because they'll be gone." Because one of the, and I hate to say it, but it's kind of a rule of the direct market: sales only go down. Because
Yeah.
Marvel had a strong newsstand presence, we could turn things around, but it took time. I'll give you an example. G.I. Joe. When G.I. Joe was the comic book everybody said they wanted because it had actual television commercials and a lot of television commercials based on the comic book because they could do a lot more things. There were no restrictions on what they could do in terms of a comic book ad. So Hasbro spent a lot of money advertising the comic books, which is their backdoor way of advertising the toys. And G.I. Joe for a year was our lowest selling comic book to the direct market. I mean, Heathcliff outsold it. And then in a period of 3 months, after a year, it went from our lowest to one of our highest because it took the retailers almost a year to realize that this thing was selling out in their stores and they should buy more copies. And we could only do that because we had a strong newsstand sales. Frank Miller's Daredevil never sold in the direct market until the death of Elektra. That was the first issue that sold in the direct market. Chris Claremont and John Byrne's X-Men run never sold in the direct market until the death of Phoenix. That's the first issue that actually started to sell in the direct market. And people look back on these things as legendary runs that, big numbers, big things. And the Frank Miller Daredevil, you couldn't give away up until the death of Elektra. And that was great material. The Claremont Byrne stuff, fabulous material. We couldn't figure out what the hell we were doing wrong that we couldn't convince people to buy that book, except they were buying it on the newsstand.
Wait a minute. So at that period when you said like before the death of Elektra and those periods, the Daredevils were still being sold on the newsstand?
Absolutely. Newsstand was where we were making most of our money.
But it wasn't until they hit the direct market until that sales blew up, you're saying?
No, our money and our basic business was the newsstand. I used to look at the direct market as just gravy, just additional money. Now, at a certain point, at the time when they decided they were going to buy their own distributors and that sort of thing, the company decided that's when they're going to walk away from the newsstand and focus on the direct market. And in my opinion, another stupid mistake. Now, I think the biggest problem with comic books today is there is no real chain of distribution. I mean, there's some chains of distribution that get you into comic book stores, but the old getting into supermarkets, 7-Elevens, all of that stuff is all gone.
Now, would it have been gone anyway by this time?
It might have been. It might have been. Because you look at magazines are gone too, but I don't know if it's because the distribution started to go away or because people stopped reading magazines.
Do you get magazines in the mail still? Do you get like New Yorker or anything like that?
No, my last magazine was Entertainment Weekly.
Really?
Yeah, and they just went to they're now online. So and I do get Mad Magazine. I get in the mail.
Really?
I mean, come on.
I'm not getting it anymore.
Certain things you can't give up, no matter how old you get. You just can't give it up.
Yeah, you're right.
In the late 70s and early 80s, I was still living in the Philippines, and I paid twice the subscription rate for Marvel and DC comics to get those issues that are in the brown wrappers.
Yeah.
I was also excited to get them in the mail all the way in Asia.
And the Filipino artists at that time were getting a third of the rate they would have been getting in the United States.
Yes.
Because Marcos told the publishers, "Oh, don't pay them for real. You'll screw up the economy like something fierce." Marcos said that. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Well, nobody knew that.
I'm going to have to talk to you about that. Maybe there's an article in there.
I don't know much about it. That's what Carmine told me.
Yeah, that stuff is all before my time, because by the time I was there, we were just paying everybody the same regular rates and stuff like that.
I'm going to ask you guys a question that's a little bit off topic, but in the Philippines, we had reprints of Marvel and DC comics that were really good reprints.
Yeah,
and I always wondered and I'm assuming because they couldn't have done reprints that well if they didn't have the original film for them. So I'm assuming there was some kind of licensing deal with the publishers in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Were you getting them in English or Spanish?
We're getting them in English.
Okay.
And these were like, and back then you didn't have scanners, so you really need the film to print these things, right?
Yeah, I know Marvel had a big film library, and we were selling, the film all over the world. Mm-hmm. Certain countries would white out the lettering and then, translate it, and certain countries just, reprinted it as is in English.
Yeah, we did it in English. The only thing we didn't have in those reprints were the ads. We had local ads on the comic books. So.
Makes sense.
Who was the guy that came up with this process to strip and recolor all the old books? And who was that?
Greg Theakston.
Greg, right. Yeah, they used to take old books. They used to cut them up with a razor blade and dip them in some solution. They did this to Superman #1 to reprint the damn thing. It was amazing. They did. They destroyed a copy of Superman #1. And they made, $1 million, $2 million on it.
We have a few questions on the chat, but let me ask one more question.
Sure.
One of the things that also was brought up in that Facebook feed was the idea that because the audience, the direct market audience, tended to be older, that was one of the reasons why a lot of the publishers, Marvel and DC, started writing darker stories, more mature stories. Because we weren't getting the 8-year-old kids from the newsstand anymore. We were getting the teenagers who could travel to a comic book shop, and in order to hang on to them, the tendency or the trend was to make the story darker, Death of Superman, or crime in Daredevil, or I don't know, Dark Knight Returns. What do you guys think?
Well, it's sort of like home box office or Showtime. You could get away with it, and that's what a lot of the creators would prefer to have written in the first place. I don't think it was the audience that was driving that.
I think it was a combination of the audience and the creators. And I think it was a big mistake because I used to tell my guys that when I was running Marvel that we are doing stories for 16-year-olds of all ages. Both, those.
So it wasn't mature. It should have been listed as Arrested Development level.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, listen, I love the medium, and I love the medium. I like the characters and that sort of stuff. But anybody who takes comic books really seriously, you're not doing the gene pool much favors. Um, we, you know,
That's a great quote, Tom.
we used to have a fabulous step ladder where they had the Disney comic books, and then they had the Harvey comic books, and then you moved up to the Archie comic books, and then there was the DC comic books, which I thought for the longest time were aimed at like 10 to 13-year-olds, and I thought, man, that was their marketplace. That was the more Weisinger stuff and a lot of the Julie stuff.
Yeah.
And then Marvel was just a dash older, and then you had the independents, and I thought we all fit into our little boxes, and it all worked. I thought, and I still think that if you're doing comic books for kids, that's a big market because kids have an unlimited source of income. It's called their parents.
Right.
Where every time an adult goes to buy anything, they question whether or not they can afford it. Oh,
right.
Oh, they're going to charge me $10 for a sandwich, but I got to eat. So can I afford it? Of course you can afford it, but you got to go through the
histrionic.
Yeah. I'm a writer. I communicate better in second draft.
Right.
Anyway, you got to, the adults, too much is happening in their lives. And I think as you get older, you lose the passion for comics where, when you're, 14, 15 and you're seeing this stuff for the first time, you're like, wow, first time you see Superman fly across, the sky or lift up a battleship or something like that. I mean, man, that stuff is cool. I remember, one of the Superman movies, somebody, Superman flies in at super speed and he punches a guy through 5 walls. And I'm thinking, I've waited my whole life to see that. That's fabulous.
Right.
About the 10th time they did it, I was, on my phone ordering Chinese food, but that's yeah.
Well, Julie used to always say that our generation is 2 years long. So we could retell stories after 2 years, or at least retell bits. I'm not sure that was true by the time I was in the business. I don't think it was that short, but it was pretty short.
Yeah, I would have said 5 years or something like that.
Okay.
But Julie really was the greatest.
Yeah.
My
my favorite dinosaur. My grandson likes Stegosauruses. I tell him I like Julie's.
Yeah, I love Julie. I never got the chance to actually work with him, but I worked with Nelson a couple of times.
Yeah.
And,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
All I was going to say is if you knew Nelson, he could be a challenge on occasion. And a couple of those occasions, at one point, he would walk out of the room and then Julie would put his hand on my shoulder and say, keep pitching there, kid. You can outlast that. Keep pitching there.
I think Nelson was the one who put together those Batman from the 30s to the 70s books, right? And the Batman and the Superman one.
Yeah, he edited all those.
I was still living in the Philippines when that happened, and I saved up for months to get those books. I would go to the bookstore every weekend and just go through it, and and eventually I was able to buy them. I don't know where they are now. I have to pick up a copy off eBay, but that's okay. But
Nelson was fabulous. He knew all of this stuff.
He knew everything.
Yeah.
He knew everything. After he died, Julie kept saying, to find out something in the past or something that had been printed or not, he said, what you do is you call up Nelson. He wasn't there anymore.
Yeah.
He died in the crisis. I used to tell people he actually died in the crisis.
We actually have some interesting questions from the audience, so let me start throwing them at you. And some of them I'm not sure if you guys would know the answer to this, but let's start with this one. Lots of artists now are foreign. Are they paid the same rates as USA?
I would think so. I would guess they are. They weren't at one time.
I would guess that they were too. The impression I'm getting, though, is that the major companies, Marvel and DC, have cut their rates.
Have they?
Yeah, I've spoken to a couple of guys that, you know, one writer said to me that, you know, he hadn't gotten a raise since 2000, and Marvel wanted to cut him like $25 a page.
Holy crap!
And he said, you know, hey, if you really want me to do this project, you got to pay me at least that rate.
I think the hard
Do you
thing
see Heidi?
about
What?
Heidi just appeared.
oh yeah, I'll add her to the screen. Heidi, there you
Hi,
are.
I'm sorry, you guys. I messed up the time, and there's no future, I guess, because the fall of Heidi MacDonald. So
That's okay. We still have a lot of time left.
yeah.
Heidi, we are going through the questions from the audience. So I'm
Okay.
going to throw another one, and please feel free to chime in.
Okay. And apologies to everyone who came. I'm very, very, very sorry. So
That's okay. So here's another
Welcome.
question from.
Stop being sorry. Welcome.
Here's another question from Edwin, and I'm going to show it. Will digital comics be the future now, and will print have a chance to stay alive? I think it's a great question for Heidi as well.
well, see, because I just jumped in here. I think it's already been proven. We've had digital comics around for 10 years, and they have not in any way, shape, or form threatened or removed print comics. I mean, they haven't made a dent. And print comic sales are higher than they've ever been. You know, during a pandemic, when in theory you couldn't get print comics, we've had supply chain issues. And digital absolutely soared, no question about it. And print sales soared. So, you know, if you're talking about just presenting comics in the digital format taking over, absolutely not. It hasn't happened with books either. There are a lot of medium where digital has predominated, like music, obviously. But for books and comics, it hasn't. And now, if you're talking about comics presented digitally, like web comics and so on, I mean, obviously, I don't know if you guys have talked about Webtoon and Tapas and all that stuff, but, there's a huge readership for comics online, no question about it. And I think it's, parallel, but we still see those comics having tremendous sales success when they're printed. Lore Olympus is like the #1 comic on Webtoon. And when it's the print edition is a bestseller, it's a New York Times bestseller. So, they are a future of they are part of comics future, but they are not the future of comics.
Tom, Elliot, any thoughts?
I never bet against the future. I have no idea, what's going to happen as time goes on. I know that as initially, I remember arguing with certain book publishers, editors at certain book publishing companies about their digital copies, saying, guys, these are not competition with you. These are additional sales. And eventually they accepted that. I got no idea what's going to happen, because I think the comic book industry is always evolving. I mean, when we started, we were on caveman walls and scrolls and stuff like that. Who knows, what the delivery system will be 20 or 30 years from now.
It's a great medium. I love reading comics that way. And it's getting better,
You love you love reading comics digitally, Elliot, you said?
I'm sorry, yeah. It's fun. I like the pages, the panels zooming in and out. I like the adaptation, especially with my eyes getting bizarre. Here. I never used to wear these damn things.
Earlier, Heidi, we were talking about how distribution, when we switched to the direct market, the industry might have lost its ability to recruit young readers. But I'm hearing a lot about how the children's market is the largest growing segment of publishing, of graphic novel publishing today. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it is. It's huge. It's kids' graphic novels are actually the fastest growing segment of publishing, not graphic novel publishing, just publishing. Manga together, they're just made huge strides. Dogman, Dave Pilkey, Publishers Weekly just had its 150th anniversary issue, and they had a list of the best-selling, nice, groovy.
Sorry.
Groovy. the
I really wanted to talk to her.
the best-selling authors of the last 25 years, and Dave Pilkey, the creator of Dogman, is on that list. And so is Jeff Kinney. We always go back and forth. Is Wimpy Kid a comic? I mean, it's not. It's a hybrid, but it has comics components. And Jeff Kinney's dream is still to be a cartoonist. So I think we should, don't reject him from our club. So yeah, I mean, I used to work at Disney Adventures magazine. Tom probably remembers that, and Elliot, and where we had comics for kids. It was the 90s, and I was told all the time that kids didn't read comics, and I was like, are you guys crazy? I mean, not Tom and Elliot, just people in the industry would tell me this, right? Tom, you did Star Comics.
That too.
Yeah.
You did Star Comics, right?
Yeah.
You did plenty.
And they sold very well.
Yeah.
But, in terms of children publishing, at one point Marvel made a deal where they were publishing Spider-Girl in manga-sized books. And we were selling anywhere from 100 to 150,000 copies an issue. And, we were thrilled up until Scholastic, as is their wont, decided that they wanted a 70% discount, at which point we parted ways.
Was that for the book club?
It was for the book club, the book fairs.
Yeah, the book fairs. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just looking at the final numbers. I didn't care where they were selling them.
Why do you? I mean, besides that, though, why do you think Marvel strayed so much from doing kids comics? There was. In the 90s, Marvel and DC both really did not do, towards the end of the 90s, just didn't do many kids comics. Why do you think, Star was successful? There was a lot of kids comics. Why?
I think at Marvel we had some not too bright management who they would look at segments of the audience, of the marketplace. They'd look at the direct market and they'd say, oh, these comics don't sell in the direct market. And they'd look at the newsstand and they'd say, well, they break even on the newsstand. And then I'd say, and look at our foreign sales, where they're selling, big numbers. There was a reason why we did 2 Heathcliff comic books a month, because we were bringing in like $100,000 a month from from our foreign sales. They also walked away from the Conan license in that time, and I wasn't on staff at the time, but Mike Hobson and I walked in and said, "Hey guys, we'll take the license." And they said, "Why?" And I said, we'll just produce the material, sell it overseas, and make a fortune. And they were convinced that we had some sneaky plan. And I kept saying, look at all your numbers together. But somehow or other, they had just tunnel vision. And they just, didn't understand that, if you're making money from 4 different sections, you got to add up the total profit.
I just wrote last year. I wrote my thesis on the industry, and one of the things that I read was that, whereas the golden and the silver ages, you had writers who were writing comics who were coming from other writing, I guess.
Other media altogether, yeah.
Right, but then the Bronze Age was the first time you had comic book writers who grew up reading comic books and wanting to emulate and wanting to write just comic books. And so we mentioned earlier that a lot of the creators wanted to write more mature content. So I'm wondering if those writers who grew up reading, the Silver and Bronze Age comics, wanting to be comic book writers, are the ones who also want to do more mature content. Because as a writer, you want to grow, right? So, what do you guys think?
Yeah,
I just always wanted to do books.
Yeah, and I always felt that certain things worked in comics and certain things worked better in prose. And if you want to do a real hardcore police detective novel, prose is the way to go. And that,
And I think I told Elliot this, but his two Superman novels were the first prose novels I ever read as a kid.
Wow.
Which is frightening. It's frightening.
Hey, I was like third grade. What do you expect?
Yeah, I know.
Right?
Well, he was motivated. He found something that motivated him. Reluctant reader, reluctant Ramon.
Okay,
The
here
first prose
is
novel I ever read was something called "The Wonderful Flight to the Mushroom Planet" by somebody named Cameron.
Eleanor
It's really
Cameron.
good.
Eleanor Cameron. Those books
Eleanor
were
Cameron,
great.
right? Did you read it?
Yes,
love
I
that
did.
stuff.
When I was a kid, it was crazy, very crazy.
Yeah.
Let me get back to some questions from the audience because I don't want them to be angry at me. So here's another one. Please discuss your thoughts on comics and graphic novels as a pipeline to feed TV and movies.
It's a lot easier to write a graphic novel than to write a prose novel. And it's a lot easier to get people to look at it than to look at your prose novel. See, I got a novel here I wrote and published myself. I'm not even going to show it to you, but nobody's going to read that. I just do it because I'm an old retired guy who's living on a pension. So,
Elliot, a lot of movie studios read novels.
yeah, they do. They do.
You know?
I'm trying to get a meeting with somebody right now, even as we speak. But it's on the basis of a script I wrote. So I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, there are guys who sit in corners and that's all they do is read novels, but you can't have a meeting with them because they're like somebody's nephew.
Yeah.
You don't know who they are.
Well, I think it's pretty amazing that these days, if you talk to anybody not in comics, they're all convinced you have to have a comic book or a graphic novel in order to sell a movie. And I try to remind them that it took us 30 years to get Spider-Man on the screen.
Yeah.
I say totally without pride that I worked on every Spider-Man script except the ones that actually got made.
I guess you're not counting the Spider-Man from the 70s, right? With what's his name? Hammond?
No, I was not with Marvel at that time.
Peter something did one. Jeez, I knew him too. I don't know.
Well, I think we all know that. Living here in New York, it seems like every time I go for a walk, cab passes, and on the top of the cab is an ad for a comic book, something based on a comic book. Now it's The Boys. I see The Boys, Moon Knight. We just had that, all the movies, everything. But everywhere there's so many shows I don't even remember them. There was a Hit Monkey show on Hulu. And all of these shows that on streaming that are, based on books from Vault, from Dark Horse, from Boom, from, everywhere. So we see the pipeline absolutely exists. And, I think Elliot and Tom just kind of hit the nail on the head. I think for a busy development executive, flipping open a comic book and looking at the pictures really helps. It speeds things along. And I think that's a huge advantage that comics have over prose, obviously. But I also think that there is a knowledge, there is an awareness that some of the most creative and wonderful stuff being done today is in comics. It's very, it's kind of like, low money, low stakes, let it all hang out, right? I just think that people in comics are not in it for the money. They could do almost anything else and make more money. So because they have the freedom to do things, and there isn't a lot of prior restraint, in comics outside the big two. I mean, I think there's a lot there. I think that, because they're huge multinational corporations with these franchises that are beloved the world over. But I think outside of those characters, I don't think there's a lot of prior restraint. So I think it's also the knowledge that this is a very creative and imaginative field that's full of new ideas. And that's,
And people who are willing to be exploited.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Perfect. A perfect combination. Absolutely.
Let me ask you guys this question. We know that the graphic novels that the big publishers are putting out are following the the business model of the published of regular books, right? Do you guys think that that the business model for single issue floppies is still a viable business model that can make money, that can support, companies or an industry today? And if not, what would it take?
Well, if you read my site, the Beat, comicsbeat.com, you will see that retailer Brian Hibbs just wrote a huge column yesterday all about that topic, Ramon. I don't know if you saw it, but and he breaks down the maths and breaks down shipping costs, breaks down discounts, which if you're I'm sure Tom is familiar with diamond discounts, right? And I've never understood ABC. There's all these tiers and what you get and whether you're brokered or not. And Brian explains it. So it's a heavy read. But he also kind of uses all that to figure out that he's losing money selling periodicals from certain publishers because they charge too much shipping at the distributor level. And so, he doesn't draw any conclusions from it. I think the periodical is a serialized nostalgia item. I don't want to ever see it go away, but it really just appeals to a certain segment of the population that does want this kind of serialized format for these characters and their entertainment. And I do think going to the comic shop and the community of it all is a huge part of this medium, and why people like going to their comic shop and picking up these books and talking about it online and everything. So I just I think it's just been proven that the graphic novel is a superior format right now for readership, and serialization is being taken over quite a bit by webtoons and by webcomics. And I love the idea of the regular ongoing story. And certainly James Tynion is somebody that we see who's really doing it quite well right now. He has a bunch of series, and when they come out, like, people are really into them and really following them. And, there's a hot run on, I wouldn't, I don't do the Marvel and DC coverage at my site, so I'm not even up to speed on them. But, a hot comic will come along, a hot writer or new writer will come along, a hot artist will come along. But, it's not, I think it's very important to a lot of comic shops, bottom line. But if Brian's numbers are right, some of these books are actually costing more to sell than they cost more just to order. It's impossible to make money on.
Does Brian talk about what demographic is still buying periodical comics?
He doesn't, and I think that's very much a shop by shop thing. I think you'll find that I think it probably, certain stores have a heavily male clientele. Some have a very mixed clientele. And, I'm not sure what the demographics. I mean, that's something I wish somebody would spend some money on demographic survey, but, that does cost real money. So nobody has it.
I'm just curious if kids are still buying periodical comics, or if it's the collectors that are buying the periodical comics.
No, children do not like periodical comics. I mean, why would they?
I'm not so sure.
I'm so glad you showed up, Heidi, because I would have had to make something up to answer that question.
I'm not so sure about that. I think there's a problem with most comic books. I really don't like the term floppies. Back in
I didn't use it.
I've been told it's a bad word. Sorry.
Well, whatever. Back in the day, a comic book was a complete unit of entertainment. Nowadays, you've got a trade paperback that puts six issues together, and you don't even have a complete unit of entertainment. A writer from another medium whose stuff I really enjoy in the other medium. He started working for Marvel. I picked up his first trade paperback, and I thought, hey, you know what? I read through the first, 5 or 6 issues, and the story is just starting with the 6th issue. I think that...
Doesn't it drive you up a wall?
you know, back in the day when I, first started writing, I remember an editor who did not say this politely, but basically informed me, kid, if you're doing a murder mystery, I want to see a body by page 5. If there's no body by page 5, I'm not going to page 6, and neither are you. And, Elliot, from writing prose, you got to hook somebody with that first paragraph, or they're not going to the second paragraph.
That's right. When I write a book, I write the first line and the last line, and then I connect them. That's how you do it.
Oh, you know what? I have to drop out for 1 second. I'm still listening. Listening.
But so many times with comic books, I read the first or second, the first 2 issues of something, and the story hasn't started yet. I think decompression
drives me up the wall.
Yeah, decompression has its uses, and there are certain guys who do it very well. But I've told comic book writers this: go to a movie, any movie, and you will see that within the first minute or 2, you're into the story, and if you're not, you lose.
You're going to go to another movie.
Yeah.
And all movies have the same structure. That's one of the things I learned when I came out here. I learned all about story structure, and I realized I knew what I was doing. But they all have the same. Act 1 has to end on page 25 all the time.
Hey, listen, as somebody who read your stuff, you knew what you were doing.
Did I? I don't know.
Yes, you did.
I told Julie at one time, I said, you taught me everything I know about story structure. He looks at me and says, I don't know a damn thing about story structure.
When do you guys think that this trend started with issues having a long arc that you had to buy 6 issues just to get the complete thing? Because I was growing up in the 70s, and every comic book was its own self-contained stories, and then later on it was like you had to follow, and not just follow one comic, you had to follow over several different comics. I remember the days when you had to buy Batman, and the next installment was in Detective Comics, and then the next installment was in Brave and the Bold, and the next installment was back in Detective Comics. So when you guys,
Marv Wolfson said to me at some point, I don't know if I should repeat this, but I will anyway. I don't care. He said, the only thing I liked about the crisis was all the money I made.
Well, I think we did start having obviously multi-part stories. What was the first, multi-part story? Was the Kree Skrull War or something like that? And they increased
X-Men. That might have been the first one.
The Galactus trilogy, 3 issues. But you're absolutely right. Those 3 issues contained what now would be, 2 years of a regular comic.
At least 2 years.
At least 2 years, if not an entire 60-issue run. So I think those not very bright executives that you referred to earlier, maybe it just became the style. And when I worked at DC, apologies, I have the cat. I'm having everything happen today, so I'm just going with the flow. The cat is here, everything. But when I worked at DC, I said that we all got our Marvel and DC comics delivered to our offices. Every week we got that week's comics from Marvel and DC, and nobody ever had to pay for that. And I think we got Dark Horse. I mean, we got so many free comics. And I said that if you wanted to see comics value, storytelling density increase, just stop sending free comics to all the editors at Marvel and DC. Because if they had to pay for their comics, how many would they buy?
It's true.
I used to get my bundle every week or 2, I guess, at the post office in New Hampshire when I was living there. I would go through them at the post office and leave like 2/3 of them on the postmaster's desk.
Yeah.
It sounds go ahead, Heidi.
No, I mean, it's like, what is the value? What is the cost to benefit? What is the value? I call it the satisfying chunk. And I'm just getting back to why kids don't read periodicals. I have another columnist who who retailer who runs a children's comic shop in Brooklyn, and he was written a couple columns that are just really incredibly illuminating for me. And he says, he got a spinner rack and he put some kids comics in it, but they don't, they do not sell. Now he's in Brooklyn in Williamsburg, so there's a lot of parents with kids in that part of Brooklyn, and they come to the shop, and getting them to buy periodical, they're not attracted to them. Now, when I was a kid, I had my Walt Disney Comics Digest. There used to be all those digests, and the Archie Digest is still there. Now, I don't know what kids read, what the readership of those are, but I just think, I loved getting my digest sized comic because it was, I counted the pages. I knew that first one was 132 pages. And then I noticed it got smaller and smaller. It's down to 64 pages. And I was like, what a ripoff. I noticed that they kept the price the same and lowered the page count. But, I loved that as a kid. That was my favorite thing. And I'm so sad that I threw them out. It wasn't even my mother. I threw them out. What was I thinking? They were really battered and torn and, kind of dirty because I just read them to bits. So
Speaking of digest, just going down memory lane also, I loved those top 10 stories from DC that they would come out with in little digest format. And I thought those were the precursors to like Vertigo, because those were the stories that were not typical superhero smash them, grab them type stories. Those were usually very human interest stories. And I thought that was, and I was really sad when they stopped doing those.
Well, I don't think they sold. I mean, did they sell? Right? Did they do well?
Oh, I don't know about those. That I don't. You'd have to go to Comic-Con to find out about those. But I assume that if they stopped doing them, they didn't sell well. So,
yeah,
good assumption. Although the Archie digests, they now do double digests and triple size digests and that sort of stuff. Those things are still selling.
I have
every once in a while they call me up and ask me to do a couple of stories for them. So I know they're still going strong.
I have one more question from one of our audience members. I'm not sure how relevant this is, but I'll post it anyways, because I don't know anything about this. NFTs and Web3. What is that? I know what NFTs are. I'm not sure what Web3 is.
I don't know what Web3 is either. Do you guys?
No.
Yeah.
No? Well, I don't know exactly, but Web3 is kind of this catch-all term for the next generation of the web with with it, like the blockchain. It's going to run off the blockchain, and the key selling point of it, as I understand it, is that it's decentralized. Because isn't that wonderful? We absolutely need things that are more uncontrolled and more decentralized without any oversight or moderation. That will solve everything. If everybody gets to have a say, problem solved.
Well,
so that was sarcasm, in case you didn't figure it out.
I have a congressman.
Yeah.
I have a congressman who's he's an accountant by trade, and he's trying to outlaw digital currency because, yeah, right.
Yeah.
I told him you should get to understand how it works because you can't outlaw it. It's not in law.
Right. Well, as NFTs and Web3, people have, Ramon, you and I have talked about NFTs, right?
I think so. Yeah.
I think so. I'd say a year ago, like 14, 15 months ago, when the NFTs first burst on the scene. I mean, I was constantly being asked to, come to a meeting or talk to somebody about how NFTs were really cool. And, I took all these meetings, and I remained very skeptical because all the things that they told me they could do, I was like, well, we have technologies that can do this. You don't really explaining what it is that the blockchain does, except that it is a permanent digital ledger. And, so writing things down permanently, okay. Yeah, all right, that's going to change society. So, we're seeing right now, just, turmoil in crypto markets. NFT market is is also coming and going. And more importantly to me, we're seeing all these scams. We're seeing people get ripped off. We're seeing, total kind of instability and a lack of accountability in this. And, the big story this week was the Seth Green NFT, the Bored Ape Yacht Club. So Bored Ape Yacht Club is a very popular NFT brand. And when you buy one, you buy the rights to it. So he bought this digital drawing of an ape and created a TV show about it. And it's already been filmed and put together. And then he says that somebody hacked his wallet and stole all the NFTs out of it. And then they sold them. And some dude out there with the screen name of Darkwing85 has bought the star of his show. And because of this permanent ledger and this permanent record, confers ownership and copyright, now he can't make his show because this guy who owns his NFT. Now, some people are saying, is this an elaborate PR scheme? Because if it is, it's pretty great. But people can be just that stupid. I like Seth Green. He seems like a nice guy. I'll say that. So we'll see where that goes. But, I absolutely do not see any benefit to humankind that NFTs have created aside from some artists I like making a lot of money. And, that's great. It's a revenue stream. Okay. I just don't see the ways that they're going to change society. Now, that said,
aren't you in favor of revenue streams? I mean, I
am in favor of revenue streams. Yes. Well, I had lunch with a smart friend of mine who's very much into the web. He was into Web 1 and Web 2, and he's certainly more aware of Web 3 than I'll ever be. And he was telling me that this is good, or it's worth exploring. And I'm like, sure, I see that. And then I said, but I will never be interested in it. And then he said, it's not for you. You're not the person this is aimed at. I'm like, oh, so, all right. There's a lot of young.
What was he saying? Was he insulting your age?
He was saying that. And, yes, basically there's a lot of young folk out there who just think this is, it's their thing. It's of their time. And, okay, you guys will figure it out. Guys and gals will figure it out. And, I'll see how society changes because of it.
Now, tell me something. This is one thing there's a lot of things I don't understand, but something I don't understand is, how do you define a blockchain record as permanent? How could it possibly be permanent? Paper isn't even permanent.
It's digital.
Actually there.
Yeah.
Well,
and if Seth Green bought something, then it should be permanent on the blockchain.
The rules
and if somebody stole it, it should still be permanent on the blockchain that's Seth Green owns.
The record should reflect that it was stolen.
Well, but it the record doesn't reflect that because of the whole idea with the blockchain is that, as I understand it, and if anybody is out here who's actually into Web3 hears me fumbling around with this, I'm sure they're laughing their ass off. But it's my understanding is that because it is decentralized and it's housed on all different computers all over that, and to the reason why it's ecologically unsound is because you have to have so many computers writing this code. And it's just like the value of pi. It's a number that is so long and so tortuous that you could never change it, and you can never rewrite it, and you can't write over it. And that's the idea.
Yeah,
it's just
the value of pi is in nature. It exists as a fraction. It's a fraction. Okay.
I'm right there with you, Elliot. Yeah. Right there with you.
Anyways, guys, we've passed the hour mark, so I think you'd like to wrap it up, and I don't want to take any more of your time. So I will ask one last question. If you could, what would you change about the industry today?
Wow.
If I had a magic
more work
wand,
for me, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah, magic wand time. Exactly.
If I had a magic wand, I would love to see a chain of distribution that could get comic books out there to the mass market again. I don't think I'm going to see that in my lifetime. As Heidi pointed out, hardcover books sales have gone up the last couple of years, which was something else I never thought I would see in my lifetime. But they have. And maybe somebody's going to come up with a chain of distribution that can get comic books out there. It might be, Kickstarter or those sort of funding things, which seem to be the best way of raising money these days.
Tom, you don't think digital distribution counts?
Digital distribution. How many thousands of comic books are on digital distribution? I don't know how you separate yourself from the pack there. And yet with novels, you do separate yourself from the pack. And even that, I am often befuddled as to, why certain guys separated themselves from the pack and certain guys didn't. Because I know some guys that, they are fabulous writers, and yet they've never hit. And I don't understand why. I love the tale of your cat.
I kind of have an idea how to make that happen, and that's why I'm trying to get a meeting with Netflix. So I'm not going to talk about it.
Well, Netflix buys a lot of stuff.
I know. I know.
They do buy a lot.
I just sent out letters to 4 agents last week who apparently have a connection there. So
and every once in a while they actually make something, and you go, "Wow, is that going to affect my sales?" And you check your royalty statements and go, "Yeah, not really."
Well, if I could change anything about the industry, I would have the industry value comics journalism.
Well,
but
forget that.
That's my personal
there's
magic
no comics
wand.
journalism without the source material. Which is not to say there isn't source material, but
I would also like to see, people, get back into valuing the craft, because, comics really, it's a craft, and so many guys think it's just sitting down and writing whatever off the top of your head, and that might be good for a first draft. But once you find out what your story is, you go back and you throw out everything that doesn't fit your feet.
Your first draft isn't worth a damn if you don't understand the structure to start with.
Elliot,
I had no idea that I did.
I'll concede that. Yeah. I mean,
Elliot.
Yeah.
Elliot, any thoughts on the question of what will you change about the industry today?
I would institute a scheme that would make it possible to put the spinner racks back in distribution. And that's what I was talking about. I've got an idea how to do that. I don't know that it'd work, and I don't know that anybody will buy it, but we'll find out.
Well, I know this is the last question, but what would you put in the spinner racks? Well, you know what, Sierra, we'll
New
have
material.
that for the okay, all right.
New material.
Well, that's
starting from zero.
I remember when Marvel dropped out of the Comics Code. I thought, oh, you idiots! Don't you realize that when you drop out of the Comics Code, you're dropping out of the Comic Magazine Association, which was the organization that put the spinner racks in all the stores. And without Marvel, and then DC dropped out, almost instantly after. Without Marvel and DC, no more spinner racks.
Are you talking about when Stan did those 2 Spider-Man books?
No. When at some time, I think in the 2000s, Marvel decided they were going to drop out of the Comics Code, and then DC followed. I didn't
realize it took that long.
Yeah, DC followed quickly, but the Comics Magazine Association, which was the main organization behind the code, that was the organization that put all the spinner racks in all the stores. And once we lost our spinner racks, we lost our distribution.
Well, thank you very much. There was a lot of information to process. We started off with a question: what happened with with the fall of the 90s, and there was more than one reason. Everybody had different experiences, had different thoughts, and it's a very complicated question. I had my own thoughts, and I'm not even sure if how valid they were.
But
I
I
wasn't.
but it's the fall and rise of comics.
Yes, the
It's
fall
all
and rise.
good. Yeah, fall and
It's all
rise.
good. And as you guys have pointed out, there are boom times and down times, and hopefully, we're seeing a boom time right now, at least with children's market and graphic novels. So again, I'd like to thank all of you guys. I really appreciate.
Thank you.
This is a great
Thanks.
this is a great panel because I have history with each and every one of you, and and Tom wrote me one of my first rejection letters, and then wrote my forward for my first graphic novel. So that was nice karma right there. And Elliot is somebody that always wanted to, like I said, he wrote my very first novel. And Heidi has been a great mentor and supporter of everything that I do. Once again, my name is Ramon Gill. This is a Comic Arts Workshop. We do offer weekly lessons on how to make comics. If you go back to the meetup page, there is a link on there where you can sign up for classes that we do offer, and we have weekly crits and things like that. So if you are interested in making comics, we do try to improve our craft, as Tom has said. So again, I would like to thank everybody. I am going to end the broadcast, but if you guys want to chat some more, I will end the broadcast, which means we will no longer be live, but you guys can stay on. We can stay on and talk some more if you guys want to. So again, thank you all for coming, and thank you for the questions.
Thank
And
you.
somebody had asked whether or not this will be made available to view later on, and the answer is yes. Okay. So again, thank you all for coming. And again,
Thank you.
Mondial
Thank you
Comic Arts
for putting
Workshop.
up with me jumping in late. I'm sorry. Apologies
That's okay.
again.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Well, it's great to see
Made the
Apologies again.
second half much more interesting.
We had a rough time. Now starts the non PC part of the conversation. Okay, take care, everybody. Thank you very much.
All right. It's great to see you